So this is Neural Education, and if you are on our Facebook group, most of you are actually, because I only posted this in the Facebook group, but our Facebook group is Neural Education, and then we have Twitter and LinkedIn sites, and then we also have the hashtag NeuralEd and Rafting Up. So you'll see NeuralEd a lot in these. So if there's anything that inspires you, you want to share out, by all means, just hashtag that NeuralEd so that if we go and search it, we can see what you're posting. Okay, so let's start with the I am here. In the chat box, go ahead and write one thing that brought you joy today. So you might have to look a little deeper. On some days it was a Monday, but maybe it was that cup of tea that you had. So what is one thing that brought you joy today?
Hummingbirds, yay.
Oops. Kieran, I can't see the chat box, but you can see it, right?
Yes. Yes, it is fantastic. People are putting in amazing things. Iced coffee, woohoo. Okay, that's it.
Okay. Oh, I just figured out how to bring people in the group. Oh, I'm learning so much. So if you're a Zoom person, you scroll up to the top and they see participants and they can come in. Awesome. Good day. That brought me joy. Okay, so this is Neural Education, and a lot of you are certified neural educators that are in the group here. I recognize a lot of names and emails there. So basically what Neural Education is, it's when a frustrated teacher, who was me, ran into, by happenstance, a cognitive learning scientist who is Kieran. And I went to a training that he did at a conference, and I said, oh my gosh, never again will I be doing the things that I am required to do as a teacher that are punitive practices and policies that really push kids out. So that's when it really kind of took ignition. We went and did a summer institute in 2016, and there are people that are in this tonight that are from that summer institute, and we have been working diligently ever since. So we invite you all to join us. Within our group tonight, we have our Neural Ed champions. These are the people who work with us. They put in countless volunteer hours. They have, some of them, you can see that some of them have Twitter hashtags. So I put the Twitter hashtags if you want to connect with them. But all of us, for the most part, are in the Neural Education Facebook group. If you're interested in becoming a champion, a trainer, by all means, we want you to join us. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about greenhousing students, specifically in the new online platform. What you will need tonight is you will need a piece of paper and a writing utensil. So if you need to go grab one of those right now, go ahead and take a moment to do that. Okay, Kieran, we're talking about greenhousing. Can you explain what greenhousing is?
So the whole concept of greenhousing popped up for us when we began to study the work of Boyce and others who talked about children being orchids or dandelions. We hadn't anticipated that kind of terminology. It's interesting because Piaget had used, he was a flower person, and he used the science of flowers and his own children when he came up with the developmental stages of education as well. So to be in the flower space is good, and greenhousing works for all flowers. When we greenhouse orchids, we also know that greenhouses help the dandelions. And we'll talk tonight about children who are orchid children, because we think about orchid children in everything we do. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're gonna take you through a challenge cycle, and this is a challenge cycle that came out of Vanderbilt and then came out of University of Washington with Dr. O'Mahony here tonight and Dr. Bransford. The first part of the model is the challenge. So go ahead and write this challenge down. How do I support my students and or child in an online platform? We'll just give you about 20 seconds to write that down. Okay, so we're going to the first part of the challenge, and that's the initial thoughts. In your initial thoughts, you are on your own piece of paper. This is nothing that anybody else is going to read, so it's very safe in your thoughts. No one besides you can access your initial thoughts. We want you to answer this question in 1 minute time, and when you're answering it, make sure you single task, so you're either thinking about it or you're writing about it. Go ahead and begin that 1 minute. 10 seconds. Time. Okay, now we're going to move on to multiple perspectives, and this is where Dr. O'Mahony is going to give you some information. So, Dr. O'Mahony, take it away.
Thanks, Missy. The challenge cycle is the model that we use to deliver content, and the content is in this section here. We call it multiple perspectives because we want to have different voices bring information to you. Today, the voice that will come first will be my voice, and second will be Dr. Pink from the book Drive. In this section, my focus is to get to, and Missy's going to move the slides for me, to get to the Maslow's hierarchy and to show you what it means to adjust that for the orchid in the classroom. So we talk about safety being critical, and physical safety and social safety, of course, is implied. Go ahead, Missy. And the next safety is emotional safety. And finally, we get to Maslow's hierarchy. And so the typical Maslow's hierarchy that we all learned, and this comes from 1950s and 60s, Maslow's work and his theories have been adjusted many times since, but they always have this idea that safety has to do with the physiological needs of the child. And we want to look at that today in a deeper sense. Go ahead, Missy. We're thinking about Dr. Boyce's work, and his definition of how children perform in the classroom or in society has to do with differential neurobiological susceptibility to social context. That's a mouthful, and it's typical for neuroscientists and cognitive scientists to think like this. But basically what that means is that we are hardwired to be susceptible to social context, and because we're all different, we will show up in our space and react and have behaviors based on that. Go ahead, Missy. So we look at the low ANS reactivity, which is autonomic nervous system, and it's easy to measure this. And some children, typically 50% of children, have very low ANS reactivity. We might term these children to be very resilient. And the next children will be less resilient and very sensitive. These are high ANS reactivity. They have a different trajectory through life and usually show up with very high morbidities. That means they're expensive children to raise, they're expensive in classrooms, take up all your time and energy because they will act up, act out, and have behaviors that do not show up as you would expect for kids who are ready to learn. Go ahead, Missy. So these kids, these hypervigilant orchid children, typically make up 20% of our classrooms. I would argue that there's a lot more in some classrooms because the kids who are not on the dandelionic side, they might have a tendency towards orchideal, and those children can easily make up another 10 or 15%. And so you may have a classroom that has a lot of kids who are needing to be greenhoused. We look at this in terms of the transporter gene for serotonin, and when you have a short expression of that gene, you will typically have a less resilient attitude in life, and be very susceptible to social context that will make you be stressed or upset or anxious and needing safety and what we call greenhousing. Go ahead, Missy. These kids typically have the best outcomes or the worst outcomes depending on the social context, and particularly depending on how much greenhousing they get. If they get greenhousing from mom and dad, they can do well. If they get greenhousing from schools, from teachers, they can do well. If they get no greenhousing from either mom or dad or schools, they will find their greenhouse somewhere else, which typically can be out on the street in drugs and gangs and violence and all kinds of what we would call high dangerous situations. And these kids are typically known as at-risk kids. Go ahead. So Maslow's hierarchy that we know, if you click it once, Missy, it'll show you that the sense of love and belonging typically comes number 3. Physiological needs come number 1, safety second, love and belonging third, esteem and self-actualization at the top end of the hierarchy. This works very well for low ANS children, and if you notice carefully, we have added the dandelion flower there because dandelions, as you know, are like weeds that can grow in a crack in the concrete. There's nothing wrong with dandelions. They're fantastic, beautiful flowers. In fact, they have a lot of very good things going about them. However, they are easy to grow, and in fact, it's hard to get rid of them. Go ahead, Missy. In this case, when you have high ANS reactivity children, we have the orchid. And if any of you have ever tried to raise an orchid, you know that you can end up with very large amounts of wilted orchids like I have in my basement. And you can see that we changed the hierarchy because the children who have high ANS reactivity need a sense of love and belonging. This has been the research from Dr. Perry recently that shows us that the sense of love and belonging is more important than physiological needs and safety. So that's a big deal for us. And if we have a classroom or an online situation where we can show the love and belonging, you will have a much better connection with these children because they will want to be loved and belong to the system. Go ahead. And this is a slide that Missy and I put together many months ago when we were talking about co-creating safe environments for students. And we know that maintaining predictable routines is a big deal for all children, but particularly for orchids. Go ahead. If we can co-create the norms, it's better than making the kids agree to norms that we give them. When they co-create, they have a bigger say in it, and that stems from the second part of our class tonight, which has to do with intrinsic motivation. Go ahead. And of course, we think as neural educators, we think about neurotransmitters every second of our day. We want to know if there's enough dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin in the room, because if there is, our children will be in a much better place to learn and accept new information. 21st century skills include intrinsic motivators, and that's and I think that's probably one of the most important pieces for gaining 21st century skills is having the intrinsic motivation as part of the makeup of every single child. The person who has to have this first, of course, is the teacher or the parent. If you're intrinsic as opposed to extrinsic in your motivation, it's easier to teach it to students then. And the last one has to do with fairness and equity and the sense of our healing the harms that occur. Typically in an extrinsic motivated environment, you will have a need for healing harm because there will be a lot of inequity and unfairness perceived by the orchid, because the orchid's go-to place 80% of the time is negative and reactive. Go ahead. So this takes us to one of the big and very surprising factors that we'll be talking about tonight is intrinsic motivation. And it turns out that what motivates humans when there is any mentalistic internal cognitive load involved is not rewards or punishments, but the following 3 traits. And that's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And we are going to spend the rest of our time tonight on those 3 pieces: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And to do that, we will also take some of the research that has been publicized by Daniel Pink in his book, Drive. And there's 40 years of research. In fact, it's very surprising to find out that there's 40 years of literature on this theme. And yet most schools don't even use the intrinsic motivator the way it's described here. Go ahead, Missy. So is this...
This is the video, and
before we go to that video, I want to just introduce it because it
okay.
does need... We have 4 videos chosen for you, but we're going to show you only 2 short ones tonight. The other 2, and actually the entire 4, will be for you for a download. And I recommend that you spend some time listening to the 4 of them. They're each one is about 2 or 3 minutes and worth listening to. The first one is a little bit longer, but it's so captivating and so interesting that we know that you'll want to spend time with it. So the first thing about it is that the science around motivation is really surprising, and things that seem obvious are not. In the first video, they talk about 2 studies that were done, very famous studies at MIT, University of Chicago, and also Carnegie Mellon. These were economists, and they looked at the most important aspects of rewards and punishments. The ideal, of course, is that if you reward somebody for doing something, they'll increase their desirability for doing that behavior. If you punish somebody for doing something, it's supposed to inhibit them from doing that behavior again. And we know, because we've seen it in classrooms, that this is not necessarily true all the time, and we want to take a look at why. And what they found was that this is one of the most amazing findings, and it's very important to think about it, because it helps us to understand why rewards appear to work sometimes in kindergarten and younger children, but not in older children. And so this is one of the reasons that we look at videos like this and spend some time thinking about it, because it has application in our classrooms every single day. So the first thing they found was that if there's any kind of if-then clause, a very simple, I give you an instruction and you must do the instruction, follow it to the letter, and there are rules involved and you get the right answer, then rewards can happen. In other words, if I say to you, I want you to go over to the table, pick up that heavy weight and bring it back to me. And if you do, I'll give you $1. Well, that works every time because it's a simple if-then clause. It's a simple no-brainer thinking system. But if there's any if the task has anything to do even with the most rudimentary cognitive skill, then any kind of reward diminishes the performance. And so that's a big takeaway for us. The higher the incentives, the lower the reward works. And I want you to look at that in the first video, or in the one we'll send home to you, but we're going to show you the second one right now. And this one is about the 3 items that actually do work, which we already mentioned, which is autonomy, mastery, and sense of purpose. Go ahead, Missy.
The work. Now, once you do that, it turns out there are 3 factors that the science shows lead to better performance. Not to mention personal satisfaction. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is our desire to be self-directed, to direct our own lives. Now, in many ways, traditional notions of management run afoul of that. Management is great if you want compliance. But if you want engagement, which is what we want in the workforce today as people are doing more complicated, sophisticated things, self-direction is better. Let me give you some examples of this, of almost radical forms of self-direction in the workplace that lead to good results. Let's start with this company right here, Atlassian, an Australian company. It's a software company, and they do something really cool. Once a quarter on a Thursday afternoon, they say to their developers, for the next 24 hours, you can work on anything you want. You can work on it the way you want. You can work on it with whomever you want. All we ask is that you show the results to the company at the end of those 24 hours in this fun kind of meeting, not a star chamber session, but this fun meeting with beer and cake and fun and other things like that. It turns out that one day of pure undiluted autonomy has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, a whole array of ideas for new products that otherwise had never emerged. One day. Now, this is not an if-then incentive. This is not the sort of thing that I would have done 3 years ago before I knew this research. I would have said, you want people to be creative and innovative? Give them a freaking innovation bonus. If you can do something cool, I'll give you $2,500. They're not doing this at all. They're essentially saying, you probably want to do something interesting. Let me just get out of your way. One day of autonomy produces things that had never emerged.
And before we go to the second or the last video we'll show today, and again, just to remind you that in the multiple perspectives, you get different voices. My voice started off, Missy's voice is there, and now we've got Daniel Pink's voice. And so the last part of this is about mastery. And the amazing thing, the amazing thing for me always is that psychologists and sociologists and economists know this because they've studied it. It's time for teachers to know it. So this is why we're bringing it to you tonight. So Missy, can you run this video? It's about mastery.
Let's talk about mastery. Mastery is our urge to get better at stuff. We like to get better at stuff. This is why people play musical instruments on the weekend. You got all these people who are acting in ways that seem irrational economically. They play musical instruments on weekends. Why? It's not going to get them a mate. It's not going to make them any money. Why are they doing it? Because it's fun, because you get better at it, and that's satisfying. Go back in time a little bit. I imagine this if I went to my first economics professor, a woman named Mary Alice Schulman. And I went to her in 1983 and said, Professor Schulman, can I talk to you after class for a moment? Yeah. I got this inkling. I got this idea for a business model. I just want to run it past you. Here's how it would work. You get a bunch of people around the world who are doing highly skilled work, but they're willing to do it for free and volunteer their time, 20, sometimes 30 hours a week. Okay, she's looking at you somewhat skeptically there. Oh, but I'm not done. And then what they create, they give it away rather than sell it. It's going to be huge. I mean, she truly would have thought I was insane. Okay, it seemed to fly in the face of so many things. But what do you have? You have Linux powering 1 out of 4 corporate servers in Fortune 500 companies, Apache powering more than the majority of web servers, Wikipedia. What's going on? Why are people doing this? Why are these people, many of whom are technically sophisticated, highly skilled people who have jobs? Okay? They have jobs. They're working at jobs for pay, doing sophisticated technological work. And yet, during their limited discretionary time, they do equally, if not more, technically sophisticated work, not for their employer, but for someone else for free. That's a strange economic behavior. Economists who looked into it, why are they doing this? It's overwhelmingly clear. Challenge and mastery, along with making a contribution. That's it. What you see more and more.
Okay, so your challenge today, of course, has to do with these videos are set about workplaces and adult learning, but your challenge is to bring that into the classroom to the age group that you're dealing with. If you have pre-K or first, second, third grade, or if you have middle school or high school, how does this model fit that classroom? Because the same brains are in your classrooms that we have with the adult learners. And the information that these economists and psychologists and sociologists know needs to be put into the classroom and shifted from extrinsic into intrinsic. Our definition, are we at that slide, Missy, the last slide for definition? The paradigm shift involves going from extrinsic to intrinsic. Our definitions are simple. Extrinsic equals rewards and punishments. We're very familiar with that world because we all grew up in it. And intrinsic are the 3 that we just gave you right now. The 3 items are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So Missy's going to drop you into some breakout rooms with some champion teachers who will facilitate for you guys. But first you need to reflect.
Okay, so we're at the part where we reflect, and you're going to take 2 minutes. And again, your challenge is, how do I support my students and or child in an online platform? The 3 questions are, what was surprising to you? What did you know but see in a new light? And what do you want help with? When you're done after this 2 minutes, then you'll get a chance to be broken up into groups to revise your thinking in smaller groups. So your 2 minutes begins now. 10 seconds. Time. Okay, so now we're going to go into our revised thinking. And in our revised thinking, I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to put you up into groups. These groups, each of your groups has 1 or 2 champions in there that are going to support you, and they're going to facilitate. So champions, you will facilitate, and champions, you can go ahead and be the scribe as well. That way, when you come back, then when you guys report out, you can either report out, or if you've got somebody that wants to report out, they can. Okay, so I'm gonna set you up. If you stay here, it means I just don't have a breakout room for you, and I will get you there. Okay, it looks like we're all back. Yay! Oh my goodness, look at this, we're figuring it out. Okay, so if you put your thing on presenter view or speaker view, then you'll be able to see whoever's doing the speaking if you prefer. I mean, obviously it's your choice. So I'm gonna just call out for our champions to just share out. And remember, champions, we won't have time to go through all 3 questions, but just you can go over some ahas that your group had, or if there's a question that you couldn't answer, then bring that question back to us. So we're going to start here with Lori Donati.
Hi, everybody. So we had a really good conversation. All of us work or have children of our own with special needs. So we all talked about that shift from having our children be at school into now the home environment, and how as a parent, we discussed how do you meet your child's needs with what their teacher is requesting of them, and how do you do that within the home while creating that intrinsic motivator. It's tricky. So we were all kind of on the dance of how to figure this out. One good question that we left with was, how do we find that balance when we are now going home? We have the intrinsic reward of things that we do at home, but now we have, external people coming in and saying, well, this is what you need to do now. And so our kids are having trouble finding that intrinsic value in what their teacher is requesting of them. So I don't know if you guys can.
I love that question, Laurie. That's a very powerful question, because I have a child at home as well right now that teachers are putting extrinsic values on him, and I'm here because my job is just to greenhouse that child. When I greenhouse him, he's way better able to deal with the extrinsic stuff that happens, because it's not going to go away. The intrinsic world is where we live. However, if we have a mental model that says, if this has any kind of cognitive load in it, it works better with intrinsic rather than extrinsic. There's no reason we couldn't tell that to the children also, and let them know that, hey, this is a thinking system, this is a problem solving, so it's better if you do that from an intrinsic point of view. So where's the autonomy? Where's the choice? Are you going to choose a red pen or a blue pen? Where's your choice? Where's the mastery? You used to know how to do it this way. Look at how much you've improved. So I'm showing you how much you got better by doing it, and showing you your mastery. And then finally, your sense of purpose is really about, do I just want to do this to please the teacher, or am I going to be good at whatever the thing is, math or science? Thank you.
Lois.
So our group had a really good conversation. I think one thing that was kind of resonant with the whole group was they knew a lot of it, but now they could put it in a context that they could discuss it from a neural ed approach. I think we ran out of time with looking at what we needed help with. And so my group was looking for different examples of how they could work with their students online, and how, excuse me, how this would work with our lower students, those who are more nonverbal.
That's such a great question, because we are constantly rewarding kids with grades, and we're always putting that grade in front of them. But for some kids, that's not really what's important. And if you've got a kid who is an orchid, they need that love and belonging first. So if you want kids to do work, You have to put the love and belonging. You have to put the oxytocin first. If you do not put that oxytocin first, they're seeking that. They're not going to do the work. And I'm sure you've experienced that as teachers, where kids won't do work, and then you call them or text them or send them a message, say, oh my gosh, what's going on? What can I do to support you? And then all of a sudden they start doing work. It's because you hit that bottom rung of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So think about that. And here's the thing. If you do that with all your kids, the orchids or the dandelions will all thrive in that environment. Okay, so let's look at Gunnar.
So our group was pretty diverse. We had 2 librarians, a music teacher, and an anatomy teacher, and then an English teacher. And one of the questions that we all kind of had, or most of us had, is that idea of motivation. When moving from an extrinsic to an intrinsic motivation model, how do you get that first spark of motivation for a kid, because they're so entrenched in this extrinsic model that they're accustomed to it? And it's almost like we've wiped their ability to be intrinsically motivated away, because the first thing they ask is, well, what's the grade? And then you say, well, it's not a grade. And they say, well, then I'm not going to do it. So that's the hard part, is making that leap. And we're trying to figure out how you can successfully make that leap with some students.
Great question. And I suspect that it'll be eyeball to eyeball with your student. And if you know the student's passion, what they like to do, you can get to them at that point. Every student is going to be good at something. And if you can find out what that is, grow that section. I agree with you totally. It's very hard to get a child to get away from the fact that they're being judged based on labels and stratification. They're better than me, and they got an A+, I got a C-. That kind of stuff is still background. We can't get away from it yet until a new assessment system follows us in, because we will bring a new assessment system into this model as well. But yeah, you have to locate each child individually and find what they're good at.
Terry.
I'm going to let Janine speak.
I know you've got a lot of people, and yeah, you've got Karen Foley in there too. You got lots of champions in there. Janine.
Lots of experts, and what's interesting is we're talking about being grandparents and moms while we're multitasking and teaching a bunch of kindergarteners and so forth. So it's interesting the way people have talked about managing in our group. And what was interesting also is that flipping that and reframing Maslow's, where love and belonging comes first. And the aha was around backing off sometimes on that academics to give that SEL support means that kids are actually going to be able to produce more work. And that was really powerful. The areas that we really are struggling with is because we know that connection comes from being with a person, and it's very difficult when we're looking at a screen and not being able to make those connections. It's kind of that hug deficit, or that able to connect deficit. And so the question that we're having is, how do we implement in a class, right, when we're brick and mortar, and what are we going to do to connect or help our kids that need our support when we're online and it feels like we have very little control?
Very interesting thing happened this week, which I'd love to share with you, because again, kids need that physical, that sense of belonging. And I heard a child say, oh my God, I hope school comes back in September. These kids typically say, I hate school. And they say, I want to get back, because they miss their buddies. The interesting thing is that a child said, you know, Miss Johnson, who teaches whatever, Spanish or something, well, I think she loves me more than her own children, because she's always saying to them, get away, I'm teaching, get away. I think she loves me more than them. So yeah, they need that sense of belonging. And finally, the last piece I want to read from Melissa's text. She says, as a quick aha, it's important from an educator perspective, sometimes we need to be aware that our caregivers are also our kids. It's a big deal. And sometimes they don't even think like that. They're in a reactive space themselves, and they need the greenhousing as well. That's why we're here to support. We do greenhousing.
Yeah, thank you. Mary Snyder.
I'm actually going to be a reporter. Okay, so we talked a couple of things. We really like the idea how the one person working at the computer place is really busy all day long, And then at night they did stuff to make a contribution on their own without pay because it was contributing to a larger thing than themselves. And then we really kind of got stuck on thinking about the rewards and consequences, especially in the special ed world, because we tend to do a lot of rewarding and talking about fading it out and how that kind of works, where we kind of have to meet kids where they are and figure out what works for them. And then another interesting conversation was one of the first grade teachers said it was really hard for her to let go of that clip chart. She got rid of it and then brought it back and then got rid of it and then brought it back. And she found it was harder for her to get rid of it than it was for the kids to let it go. And so that was kind of interesting how we build those things in. And when we want to get rid of them, we're more attached to them than the kids are.
That is interesting. Thanks for sharing so much, Danny. And then you said something about the rewards and punishment. I guess I'm not seeing Tabitha. I was gonna have Tabitha respond to that. Tabitha, are you in there somewhere?
I'm here.
Oh, good. Can you respond to that, the rewards and punishments in the special education classrooms?
Yes, I teach in a self-contained classroom, and the majority of my students have autism, and we don't use reward systems at all. We use the autonomy, mastery, and purpose by helping students have as much independence as possible so that they can have self-efficacy and know that they can do things, and that's enough. And they all came from schools and programs that of course used lots of rewards, because typically that's what happens in that type of a classroom, right? They're not going to do anything unless you reward them. Well, you got to find out what they like, and then you got to use it. And so that actually causes a lot of behavior and other issues that we see go away when we use this model. And we just use a lot of structure to help them to be able to be independent at school.
We also talked.
Oh, go ahead.
We also talked about that, the idea is not to have that extrinsic thing, because we don't want to be following a 21-year-old around giving them Tootsie Rolls for everything they do good. And too often in special ed classrooms, we can get stuck in that. And that's not healthy for the child. They need to be able to do those things without having that prop always.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also it can be really unsafe later when they're bigger and the rewards have to get bigger, and you make a really big problem for their family when you do that.
Big problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so guess what? We are out of time. If you want to stay on longer because you have more questions, Kieran and I are definitely okay staying, and maybe some of our champions can stay as well. But we want to go ahead and honor your time. So right now, your long-term potentiation, in the chat box, write down one word or concept that you're leaving with tonight, something that you're like, okay, I'm really gonna myelinate on this, I'm gonna process this tonight. So go ahead and put that in the chat box. And then you'll notice the screen here. If you are wanting more of this, if this is something that interests you, we have summer institutes. There are neuroscience of learning institutes that happen to be going on this summer. They are online. They're not 7 hours of Zoom. They're just little snippets like what we just had tonight. Tonight was a good sample of what we'll be doing. You'll have more report out time and more revised thinking time. But here are the dates if you want to just take a quick snapshot of this. If you are interested, you can go to neuraleducation.org and register. Our courses are filling up very quickly. I'm not just saying that, I really mean it. They're filling up quickly. So if it's something that you're interested, you might want to get in sooner than later. All right, we appreciate you all so much for coming. Thank you so much. If you want to stay because you have some questions still, feel free. Otherwise, you can also ask them in our Neural Education Facebook page. All right, everybody, thank you so much, and thank you, champions.
Thank you all. Good night.
Missy, can you help me with something?
Yes.
How do I get Joey motivated to do school?
Yeah, so
help me.
there are some things that are working against you, and it's interesting because Kristen and I have been talking about this a lot. The whole thing with the governor coming out with Chris Reichel is do no harm, right? Right. And so unfortunately schools, we have done a reward system punishment all along with grades. And now we're saying anything past March 13th, you know, your grade is what it is, so you don't have to do any work. And really, it's a perfect example of how instead of learning being the reward, the intrinsic reward of learning, we have made it so entrenched in our system that the grade is what you go for. So now kids are like, I'm not doing it because it's not going to impact my grade. It's not going to affect me graduating. It's not going to, and what grade is Joey in?
He's in 8th right now.
So 8th grade. So he's been told it doesn't count so many times, right? Because we tell kids that once you get a 9th grade, it really counts. So the whole thing is that it's been switched to an extrinsic reward for him. That's what learning is for him. But I guarantee you learning is not extrinsic for him. What are some of the things that he likes to do?
Oh, went for concert band. Like last week, that was his thing. Mom, it's all about band. It's all about band. I'm like, cool, dude, I get it.
Yeah. And here's the thing. He is wiring that prefrontal cortex. The more he's singing, the more he's doing instruments, the more he's getting exercise. Those are the things that have the biggest impact on myelination in the prefrontal cortex. So one thing, I know I've been doing this with my kid too, like you sing away, you play away, and you know what? Let's go spend 15 minutes on some work now. So make his schooling about all those things that are wiring that brain in a positive way.
All right, well, I'm doing good then. That's what I've been doing.
Yay!
That's good. And I saw Nate the other day. I'm like, hey!
Yeah, that's right.
I saw something happen recently too that's very interesting, where somebody put on Facebook some really interesting math problem that was kind of, it was difficult to solve, but because it had several layers to it. And as soon as the adult says, I don't know how to do this, I can't solve this, the kid says, let me try that. And suddenly they're all trying to solve it together. And even if they didn't get the right answer, it didn't matter. It was just that we're working together, having fun, trying to solve. And when you're doing that, you're in your PFC, you're growing the right structures, and you're myelinating.
I love it. That helps. Thank you guys so much.
Welcome.
You're so welcome. So good to see you, Amy.
You too. See you soon. And I'll see you running again. That was me looking at you, by the way.
Yeah, you know I'll be out there.
So Dodie, how do we create neurotransmitters in Zoom? And you know what? That we should have mentioned that tonight. You can show brain breaks in Zoom and have people experience the oxytocin and the norepinephrine just so easily if it's a fun brain break, which we do all the time. So it can be done.
Mary did her PLC for our district, the neural PLC today on that, how to create neurotransmitters online, basically, or through remote learning.
Oh,
so you got anything to say, Mary?
Want to say what you learned, Tabitha? Just kidding. Well, the three major things that I talked about today, Jody, and the others who are still on the call is the first thing I talked about was neurotransmitters. So the oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine are the four big ones that we talk about in neural ed. And so first of all together as a class, when we came together as our opening activity, we did a little bit of chair yoga, and it was a ton of fun. We all turned on our microphones. That's one of the things, Jody. It's like we have to get over this sense of everybody has to be muted all the time, right? So you know how when you hear someone laugh, it makes you laugh, right? So we need to have that like a free expression of fun. And part of what I do in almost every training that I'm leading right now, which is tons online, is I have everyone unmute at the beginning, not for the whole time, but at the beginning we unmute, we say hello to each other. Everybody talk at the same time. You haven't seen your friend in a week. Say their name out loud, wave to them, look right at them in the camera, and just like give space for that. Take away some of the formality of the online space. In class, they would be poking each other or like, you know, hitting each other, you know, a nice little friend tap, whatever. And we don't have that in Zoom, so we have to create the space for that. Then we talked about some ways to activate mirror neurons in the Zoom setting with things like chair yoga, or even things like these clap patterns. I'll make a clap pattern, you all return the clap pattern. Like we can do things like that. Then I also talked about increasing stories in the Zoom space, so connecting your learning to some narrative stories, that turns a lot of things on in our brains, right? And then the last thing that I talked about was increasing a sense of belonging offline. So making phone calls, sending postcards, pictures of you with your family. Every kid gets them. One of the teachers shared this project that she's doing. She made a picture of herself, like a full body picture of herself. Those of us who teach primary, we know this project, Flat Stanley, where you mail Stanley all over this country. Well, she's mailing herself, the teacher, right? She mailed every one of her kids a little, her name is Fraley, Flat Fraley, and a bingo board. And the kids are getting bingo by doing things with that picture of her. So if they take her with them on a bike ride, if they bring her to a Zoom meeting, if they eat, bring her to their dinner table, and then they just tell her like what they talked about at dinner with their family, whatever. It's just a cool way for them to feel connected to their teacher, right? All through their day. So we talked a lot about different things like that, and I can talk with you more, Dodie, or share on Facebook too. Some other ideas, but lots of teachers are doing these things already, and it's just a matter of recognizing it and being purposeful about infusing it into the Zoom space.
Yeah, I have a student who's mirror neuroning what's happening in his house. So his brother's on the couch next to him and is checked out.
Yeah.
And so getting him engaged just in anything, it's just.
Yeah, so that's a more of a structure question, right? So how to help him and his family create a structure in his space where he can be totally focused with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is totally a structure for the family itself. So, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Missy, there was a question from Nancy Speaker. Hi, Nancy. Where do we download the videos? Can you talk to that?
Oh, are you talking about the video of tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna go ahead, when we're done here, I'll go ahead and process it and put it on YouTube, and then I'll share a link on Facebook.
Okay.
Missy or Kieran, either one. I had a couple teachers who are still struggling with getting their kids to engage even initially since the closure. So any other great ideas for getting there? Like you can get a lot of us have gotten them to the Zoom and we can do things after that, but more advice and ideas around that idea of initial contact.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think every teacher I've talked to says about 50% of their kids are engaging and 50% are not. And so then if you look at your DNF data, which do you guys call it DNF data, where you have to figure out how many kids are failing, how many kids are getting D's, and share it with your administrators. Anyway, that data is like, huge now compared to what it's been when we're in our in classroom with our students. But if we look at orchids and dandelions, and the kids that are engaging are most likely either the dandelions or the orchids who are being greenhoused at home. So what are our systems of support from school? And remember, every kid needs 4 consistent caring adults. And if kids got mom at home that's caring and consistent, who are the other 3? So we have to be thinking about that. And I know with my school, we already have it set up because we're an alternative high school. I'm not the only one who calls those kids. I'm one of like 6 people that are calling on the same kids over and over again just to check in. And so we are making sure that all of those systems of support, all of those sides on the greenhouse, like Bruce Perry says, you need 4 consistent caring adults, are covered. If we leave it to one person, if we say the advisor's in charge of these kids, that's only one side of the greenhouse. So we have to think bigger when it comes down to caring for our kids. And let me tell you something, there are a lot of teachers and a lot of people that are doing huge amounts of work right now. I mean, it's like cocoon. And there are people who are sitting at home bored. What can we do to engage those people who are sitting at home? And we get mad at them for not working, but we need to be the one that's engaging them as well. So paraeducators, who are the people who aren't putting together curriculum? Like, let's make sure everybody has some purpose in this.
So there's one other thing as well that I've noticed it's happening quite a lot. While the teacher is on the Zoom or whatever, Teams meetings, whatever they are called, if you find that the teacher is doing 99% of the talking, then it's not working. And so somehow you have to think about, how am I going to have the child, and you can prepare them up ahead. You're going to be talking for 3 minutes between now and then. So be ready, talk about this. And so the child is told that this is when they're going to be on, and this is what they have to talk about. Compared to, I'm going to talk and I'll be doing all the question asking. You'll just say things like, yeah, no, monosyllabic answers. So getting beyond that monosyllabic stuff is the big deal. And once the child gets used to saying, well, my contribution is going to be about blah, blah. Again, the 3 questions that we typically have are designed to get the child's voice. And that's what was surprising. Well, what was surprising about anything, they'll have something to say. So getting to that voice is the key.
So I've got a question about that, or a thought, and that's where the most common thing that people are using are Zoom, and kids don't like Zoom. They don't like being on camera in place. Has anybody reached out using social media that the kids are already using and had any luck with that? How's it gone, Kristen?
I actually, and I hate even saying this out loud, but I've been using Snapchat for 5 years, and it's their medium. It's the way I can get everything out. I can get my announcements out, but I don't follow the kids back. So that's the nice part about Snapchat, is you can actually lock it down so they can follow you, but you have to choose to follow them. Mm-hmm. And that's I was losing my mind going, what am I going to do? I have Canvas announcements. I have email for these kids. I've got all these things. And Snapchat is what gets them the most. Yes. It's sad. I mean, my teenage daughter, my 16-year-old daughter just literally said, yep.
Well, but I mean, isn't that the point though, of trying to meet the kids where they're at with what they're comfortable with, and going,
yeah.
And
I put it the same thing in all the same mediums. So I send it as a Snapchat, and then I put it in Remind, and I put it in Canvas, and I put it in email. So it's a lot of work for me. But most of the kids, I get 12 into each class for Remind, but I've got hundreds of students who follow me on Snapchat.
Okay. Wow.
I know.
Sorry
for my principals. I see principals.
No, I mean the thing that I think worries a lot of teachers is the online danger of being a teacher with the social aspect of students. But getting past that idea that they don't see it as just a social tool, it's their medium, it's their tool. And so it's just something that I've been thinking about trying to do, because I was never,
they don't call each other and they don't text. I mean, it literally, like McKenna, my daughter, who's standing right here, maybe has 5 people's phone numbers, 5 that she texts with. Everything else is all Snapchat. And so it's
Did you make a special account, Kristen?
Yes.
You made a special teacher account for your Snapchat.
There's no such thing as a teacher account on Snapchat, but it's called.
You know what I'm saying? Your professional account, you only do your professional
and
stuff.
It follows all of my other handles, right? Same.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding when I say I know nothing of what they do. I don't follow them. I can't see them. I can't.
Gotcha.
I mean, they can't send messages back to me. They know that they have to send them to me either in Canvas or in Insta, because if the way I have it set up is it's literally you guys could see it. Like the whole world can see I'm that wide open as far as what my posts are, but there is literally, I only follow maybe 12 people back, and that's like my kids and my kids' friends, and I think that's it. So yeah. So as long as you lock these things down, but I also have a director who wants us on Twitter too. So he wants us on Twitter and people following us on Twitter. And so I'm like, if he wants me on Twitter, same,
Well, I think the problem is that and here's what I found is I asked my students a poll. I did a poll about, are you going to Zoom meetings? And if you are or are not going, why? They look at it purely as an academic resource, as in, I don't need help in the class. I'm doing fine with the grade, or the grade doesn't matter, so I'm not going to go. the question is, how do we turn it into more of a social activity, and try to get kids, because I feel like what I've done is because I was so slow on the uptake with it, I've lost all my kids. I don't know how to get them back to just, hey, we're going to play a game. Hey, we're going to do something else. So I think that that's one of the things that we look at, is they're looking at it as this is their academic thing, and that's not interesting to them whatsoever.
One of the things that we found is I have one teacher who's just hitting it right out of the park. And I went into his class and he had more kids than he has enrolled. And so I was like, what in the world? How is it that this guy has this many kids in a class and doesn't even have that many kids signed up? And he has got all the neurotransmitters on full overload. I mean, like, he is amazing. And the first thing I said, how did you do it? And he's like, well, it's them, it's not me. And I said, well, no, really, how did you do it? We do walkthroughs on all of our classes as they go. We have a schedule. And he said the first assignment for them is to figure out how to chat with somebody. So it's kind of like what Mary said. I don't want you to mute your microphone. It's time to be social. It's time to get involved. And so setting up a virtual classroom, much like you would do your own classroom, and setting parameters and telling people how and where to go, he made it a social occasion. And just like Mary said, I mean, there's key elements in the fact that you connect with stories. So he's busy telling stories. And, one of the things that's amazing about the amygdala is we think about the amygdala being something that we don't want to hijack. Well, if we use the amygdala appropriately, we can connect with stories and emotion and feelings to get those thinking pieces long term. And so what he's doing is he is all about stories and making kids connect and giving them time to talk. They're dying to be social. And so he's leveraging every second of that. And so the last piece that Mary said was about increasing belonging, right? Increasing belonging. He mastered that. So in a classroom where we've got how many kids enrolled and he's doubled his attendance, and I've got other people that, let's go non-example, because that's one of the best ways to say this is working, this is not, what's happening here, what is happening there. And I've got a class where every day nobody's showing up, and I walk through that class and the first thing is like, well, I don't see so-and-so. And remember, we're gonna make sure we don't have our phones out. And I'm thinking, ooh. So 1, I'm going to shut kids down. 2, I'm going to make sure that they know this is a place that you don't want to be. And here's the deal. It's business and marketing right now, because kids don't have to be there. You are not captive audience. Mm-hmm. So the switches, the 3 things that Mary talked about, switching the whole paradigm and realizing you're going to have to work to get an audience. And the way you get an audience is by hitting all those neurotransmitters.
Good point. And here's the thing too, kids are not required to be in Zoom. And so when we start making it a requirement, or we start getting on them for not being in Zoom, then they're really not going to be in Zoom. I know that I find that my Zooms, most of them are one-on-one, because the kids say, I don't want to come to the advisory Zoom, or I don't want to come to the Zoom. Can I just meet with you one-on-one? Yes. And it comes back to what, was it Mary or Tabitha talking about anxiety? Yeah, Dawn was talking about it, the anxiety of the Zoom. Sometimes it's just that big space, right? So to do it one-on-one, to make it safer, then maybe that's what's going to bring kids in for more social experience later.
One other thing to add to that is pulled the data. And so when we looked at when kids are connecting, so we have a model set up where I asked teachers to record 20 minutes of their lesson. And then after 20 minutes, they stop recording, and then they spend time just helping students. And then they have to post that video in their channel. And so what happens then is kids come back to that, and really, really interesting, even the little tiny guys, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd graders, and the high school students, the time they're logging in to view those videos is midnight and 3 a.m. Those are our top times that kids are tuning in. And so they are coming. They're coming, but we can't just rely on a certain time in the day. I mean, our kids are, many of them are nocturnal. Many of them don't have parents home during the day. And so the truth of the matter is, when we make things more available and more flexible, that's when we see kids coming. And so without that data, we didn't know that they were showing up, but there they were. Accessibility, equity.
Very cool.
Yep. All right. Well, I am going to post this video so people can share it out. Do we have any last questions that are just burning that need to be answered before we go?
I have a quick question about the classes this summer. I just went to the webpage and the buttons all say registration open, and you click on them and all but one of them says event registration is closed. So
yeah, that'll be straightened out this week. We're just setting this.
Okay.
We've been doing our best to try and get it all arranged.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed the opportunity.
Yeah.
It's our fault. We're just trying to keep up with the changes that are happening.
Yeah, I kind of forgot that we were opening that on Friday, so that's my bad. Oh, it'll be opening.
That's okay. It just means I still have a chance to go. Thank you.
Oh, you absolutely have a chance. And here's the reality. We have a pretty strong inkling based on the numbers that we have already that we're going to have to open a 4th week. So we're not going to leave anybody out.
Absolutely not. Good to see you, Jane.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks, Missy. This is
all right.
And you'll keep
Thank you so much, guys. It's great seeing y'all.